This underrated, mind-scarring Indonesian movie about Djinns is not for the faint-hearted. Terrible acts such as robbery or murders cannot be committed by everyone. It requires a lot of preparation, planning, and execution. But something like gossiping or backbiting is simple. Anyone can do it. It can be done wherever and whenever, without any thought, weapon, or planning. It can destroy your relationship with your friends or ruin someone's life, even though the amount of effort you put into doing so is probably nil. And that is exactly what the 2021 film Ghibah dives into. Ghibah is the very act of talking ill about a person behind their back, which is looked down upon according to the teachings in Islam. In this 2021 Indonesian horror film, the story revolves around some college students who get possessed by the Ifrit Djinn due to their gossipy nature and are subsequently plagued with terrible hallucinations. Before diving into the content, we would like to make a very small request to our viewers. Please subscribe to Marvelous Videos. Like and comment on our videos, and press the bell icon to be notified whenever we upload a video. We will be grateful to you, and we hope to bring you the best nerdy content. And with that, let's get right into the video. The story of a djinn straight out of nightmares. The movie opens with some college students sitting around a table and trying to come up with ideas for their college magazine. Arga is their chief editor, while Furley, Yola, Ulfa, and Reno are the other members. Their sixth member, Okta, had been on sick leave for over 10 days. She was working on a story trying to expose a secret relationship between a college student and a professor, which Arga was against because he did not want the other girl's reputation to get ruined. Reno orders food for everyone without considering that Furley is a vegetarian. When she leaves, Arga, who has a thing for her by the way, proposes that she join him in covering a story, but she refuses as she has to take her father to the hospital. Furley goes to Ulfa's house, where Okta used to live as well, but the house owners tell them that something's wrong with Okta and that she has been screaming. Furley goes to see her, but finds Okta hiding herself in fear. She tells Furley that a woman has been haunting her everywhere. She asks Furley to take an envelope to Arga. This was the envelope with the story about the girl's affair with her professor. When Furley asks Okta about it, she tells Furley not to mention that here. The next day, Furley and Ulfa go to the mosque where people gossip about others during the Imam's sermon, that too on the day of Eid. Just then, a white smoke enters the body of the gossip mongers through their mouths. Furley goes back home and talks to her parents when Yola calls her and asks her to cover the story for her as she was sick. Furley denies because she had to take her dad to the hospital, but gives in after a ton of persuasion. Furley goes to the mosque with Arga and Ulfa to cover a story about the goats being sacrificed, but is terribly uncomfortable while doing so since she is a vegetarian. Ulfa shows her a photo Yola had just posted on social media where she was dressed up in a hotel room. Furley gets annoyed at Yola lying to her and begins to gossip about her when the smoke-like thing enters her body as well. She gets a bit dizzy when some of the blood from a goat which was being chopped gets splattered on her. She goes to the washroom and cleans herself when she gets a terrifying vision where she rips her own skin apart. She realizes it is a vision and begins to hear some noises coming from the bathroom stalls. She goes to check but finds nothing. Meanwhile, Okta reads the namaz in her room when the old lady who she had claimed was haunting her appears in front of her and possesses her. She goes out and causes trouble in the boarding house when Umi, one of the owners, realizes that something is wrong with her and her eyes turn white. She makes Okta unconscious and takes her to her room, which smells like carcasses. Umi is revealed to have powers, which she is using after a long time. She interrogates Okta. Meanwhile, her husband Mang tells Dina that Umi is from the Mataram dynasty, a clan who possesses powers gifted by the Djinn. He tells her that though some Djinns are good, others can be extremely malicious. Umi asks Okta where she is when the Ifrit Djinn appears. Umi recites the du'as, but the Djinn claims to be more powerful than Umi. In the end, Umi is able to subdue the Djinn after putting in a lot of effort. At Furley's place, she sees that her mother had a mild accident, which wounded her. Furley gets mad at Yola for not letting her go and begins to talk about her behind her back, even though her parents ask her not to do so. She goes to check on Okta, who has been taken away by her father due to her condition. Then Umi sits her, Ulfa, and Dina down and asks them to pray frequently for their safety. However, she doesn't tell them exactly what is going on. The next day, Furley lashes out at Yola in the college corridors and reveals that she had spent the day of Eid in the hotel room with her boyfriend. Yola acts shocked, as if she did not know what Furley was talking about, but the damage is done, and everyone begins to judge Yola for spending the day of Eid in the hotel room. Yola goes to the meeting and breaks down and defames Furley in front of Reno, trying to strain their bond. He gives Yola the story of the student and professor by Okta, and she reads it. The smoke then enters her body. During class, Furley begins to hear noises coming from somewhere. Her professor stops teaching and tells the class that gossiping about people, especially to harm them, is one of the biggest sins. He accuses Furley of doing so, and she leaves the class. She comes across Ulfa and Dina, who reveal that they had been calling her, but Furley is confused as she thought she was in class with them. She goes back to the class to get her phone and sees that the place has been abandoned and wrecked. She turns and finds Ulfa and Dina to be missing. When she looks at her phone, she sees the face of the Ifrit demon and gets mortified. She goes to the magazine room where Yola insists they publish the story about the professor and the student. As usual, Arga is against it, especially because the student had become pregnant and the publishing of the story would destroy her image. Arga suggests a new story where they go and inspect an illegal meat market in Indonesia, similar to the one in Wuhan that had caused the viral outbreak. At night, Yola publishes the story of the student and the professor, but writes Furley's name in place of the student's for revenge. Ulfa calls Furley to tell her about it, but Furley pays no attention to it. She sits down for dinner and finds that it tastes exceptionally good when her parents point out that she is eating meat. She looks at her plate and gets shocked. She begins to gag, but pukes out only maggots and worms. Her mother tries to console her while she breaks down. The next morning, she goes to the meat market with Arga, where Furley gets disturbed by dogs being slaughtered. A man beats a dog to death and Furley begins to cry when she gets a vision of herself enjoying dog meat. She then leaves. The next day, her peers at college sneer at her, but Furley is oblivious to the reason. Arga rushes to Yola to accuse her of what she did, but to Yola, Arga seems to be offering her sausages. She takes them and eats them with joy, but in reality, she was eating her own fingers. Arga wasn't there at all. Furley sees this and gets even more scared, and Yola is taken to the hospital. Furley meets with Okta, whose situation looks even worse than before. She confesses that her story about the professor and the student was true, but she had changed a lot of the details to make the story more juicy. Out of fear, the girl had aborted her child, and ever since that, Okta was being haunted by the old lady. Meanwhile, Arga calls Furley and tells her that Yola has become possessed and escaped from the hospital. Furley goes to Okta's house, where Umi reveals that Okta, Furley, and Yola were being tormented by the Ifrit Djinn, the world's oldest Djinn, due to their habit of talking about people behind their backs, or Ghibah, which is considered to be a sin worse than murder. Furley reads about the Ifrit Djinn at home when the white smoke enters her body once again. She goes to the washroom where she sees black liquid smothering her, and she finds herself at the illegal meat market once again. The Djinn attacks by making its host hallucinate. Furley sees a woman with a distorted face and her mother locked in a cage. She tries to save her mother and gets out of the cage, but suddenly her mother turns into the Ifrit Djinn. She wakes up and realizes that it was a nightmare. Her problems were far from over, because just then a possessed Yola appears in front of her and attacks her. Furla calls Arga and Reno, but Yola tries to kill her. The others arrive and Yola wounds Reno, but he manages to knock her out. The room gets flooded with smoke, and the Ifrit attacks Furley, taking her to its own world. Umi asks everyone to pray and goes to the Ifrit's world to help Furley, where she is severely overpowered by the Djinn. The Ifrit tries to drown Furley in a lake, and Umi's prayers do not work until Furley starts to pray herself, which weakens the Djinn. She awakens and is now absolved of the Djinn's curse. The next day, Furley and Yola apologize to each other, and Yola claims that the photo she had posted was an old photo. Furley, Dina, and Ufa talk, but hold their tongues due to being scared of the Djinn. But Mong tells them as long as they pray, they have nothing to be afraid of. And the movie ends. The director of the movie, Monty Tiwa, has a pretty strong portfolio when it comes to the music scores in his films, and Ghibah holds the candle to that. This combined with the dimly lit scenes help create the perfect somber atmosphere. Some minute details, such as the world turning reddish during a vision or when Furley was being drowned in the lake, does a perfect job at showing us how terrifying the Ifrit Djinn's domain is. The film's main focus is to impart its morals. According to Islamic teachings, Ghibah is gravely looked down upon, even more so than murders. In fact, it is compared to eating the carcass of one's own brother. That is because, at least with murder, one would require some weapons or prior planning. But Ghibah can happen anywhere or anytime, and talking behind the backs of friends you should care for and causing them harm is a huge betrayal. Some of its scenes have moments that aren't quite right, such as the scene at the mosque during the Eid al-Adha prayer where the preacher would stop to ask questions, which is not something that typically happens during a lecture on Eid. Other than that, Ghibah does a great job at getting its point across via an interesting story. The Ancient Djinn. What is she like? The movie has only one antagonist, and that is the Ifrit Djinn. In the Islamic context, jinns are often believed to be evil spirits who may possess people and cause misfortunes on their lives. According to folklore, jinns come from a world different from the one we live in. There are varying stories about beliefs about why a person would get possessed by a jinn. There are stories where jinns fall in love with beautiful humans and attach themselves to their spirits. Some jinns are considered to be invisible and tricksters. In this movie, the Ifrit Djinn possesses people who backbite and gossip too much, which is considered to be a sin in Islam. According to Islamic mythology, the Ifrit Djinn is associated with the underworld and identified as powerful demons who inhabit desolate places such as temples or the ruins. In the movie, the Ifrit Djinn possesses people when they gossip or commit Ghibah. In one of the scenes, it did cause a place to become ruined and desolate, like its preferred habitat in folklore. For example, the time when Umi tried to rid Okta of the Djinn, or when Furley went back to her class to get her phone, but saw that her place had been torn apart and abandoned. Whenever the smoke-like thing appeared, someone was gossiping. The first time it was seen was during the lecture at the mosque, where the people were gossiping during a pious occasion. After that, it happened when Furley spoke ill of Yola with Ufa. It happened again when Yola was reading the story about the student and the professor. Another time it happened was when Furley was reading about the Djinn, which meant that it did not like it when those who possessed the Djinn tried to learn about it. It is unknown whether it would possess people who were not possessed in trying to learn about the Djinn. As the Ifrit Djinn is believed to be older than the existence of humans, it appears as a very, very old woman. In the movie, it is shown to be very powerful, even against Umi, who had been given her powers by benevolent jinns. However, it was vulnerable to prayers and du'as. It was especially vulnerable when one of the bodies it had possessed offered du'as, which is what we see towards the end when the prayers of Umi and Furley's friends are not strong enough against the Djinn. But once Furley begins to pray, the Djinn gets weaker. The host entering the Ifrit Djinn's domain and praying might be the only way to get rid of the Djinn, as Umi's prayers were only able to subdue it, but did nothing to take it away from Okta. The Djinn feeds on the fears of its hosts and makes them have terrible dreams. It was aware of Furley being a vegetarian and not being able to withstand animals being slaughtered. That's why it would show her visions of her eating dog meat, scraping her own skin off, puking out worms, and getting stuck in the illegal meat market. Meanwhile, the Djinn would spend more time haunting Okta, and it had turned Yola extremely aggressive with bloodlust, causing her to eat her own fingers and trying to kill Furley. One interesting thing would be how the Djinn is considered to be evil, but it also only possesses those committing the sin of Ghibah. Some could perceive it as a punishment for a crime, but of course the visions the Djinn showed them were far too harsh and almost destroyed their lives over some gossip. It is also quite usual for people to indulge in some casual gossip, but you could say that things get really bad when you talk ill about your friends and those who are close to you, or do something that can cause harm to them. For example, publishing the story about the girl would have ruined her reputation, and Okta only got possessed after the other girl had to abort her child, while abortion is forbidden in Islam. So Okta causing someone to commit a forbidden act made her a prime target for the Djinn to possess her, because she is the main perpetrator of the sin here. At the end of the day, the Djinn here is a malevolent entity that can be kept away with prayers. Otherwise, there is no way to avoid its misfortune. Why you should watch Ghibah. Ghibah might not have jump scares or be a scary movie per se, but it is hoisted by a good storyline. In fact, several Muslim kids have grown up hearing stories of the Djinn from their family members, so to watch a story about the Ifrit Djinn can be quite exciting. For others, it can be a great dive into the lore and belief of another culture and learn more about it the most exciting way possible. What did you think about the movie? Did you enjoy this video? If yes, then please don't forget to like and comment on this video. Till then, goodbye and have a nice one.